Welcome back to Heroes Next Door. Thank you all for joining us today. Today we're doing another episode of Around the Fire Table, where we talk about the topics that affect you directly. I'm talking to Matt Evenhouse, Dr. Matt Evenhouse, a good friend of mine from way back in school, that has recently written a book in regards to some of the issues that we are facing. Welcome, Matt, to the fire table, and we appreciate you coming on and talking to us. I had an opportunity to do an overview of your book, and it looked awesome. First of all, can you do me a favor and just introduce yourself to the viewers and the listeners on who you are, where you come from, that kind of stuff?
My background is emergency medicine. I grew up in Western Michigan. Mike and I went to the same schools as kids, grew up in the same way. And then life, you each go your own way, but we came across each other. I had gone to medical school in Philadelphia and ended up as an ER guy, trained at Metro Health in the Cleveland Clinic up in Cleveland. And my passion was always around air medical services and EMS. And I ended up as a medical director for some SWAT teams at the same time that I was flying with Life Flight and working ER shifts. And that, there's a lot of material there because my life didn't go the way I planned it. I was a very high performing, high achieving guy. I met success early, and then I had some health issues that really tumbled. And that's really defined the last 16 years of my life. And it sent me on a path that I think is really interesting. I went from emergency medicine to holistic wellness, and I was using IV nutrient strategies to treat PTSD and traumatic brain injury. And the world's an interesting place in that when you set yourself up as something unique, the first thing you encounter is a whole bunch of pushback.
Oh, yeah.
And so my pushback was in every aspect of my life: mental, emotional health, addiction. After that, it was divorce. Then it was another divorce. And it was like peeling layers off the onion. Like, why is this not working? And I kept going deeper and deeper into the self-help, self-reflection stuff because I wasn't getting anywhere with modern psychology and psychiatry. And now I'm at an interesting point where it's like, okay, I've done the deep dives. I've sort of had the dark night of the soul. And when you come out of that process, it's like, okay, you're ready to serve. Now, how do I serve?
Right. And to the world's mind, you've been serving all your life. You've been that servant of in the emergency room, serving, the lay public. You've been serving the flight communities and the military communities for years, but now you're coming back to that.
Yeah. And it's different because, I had experiences as a ER doc where I could pick up a chart and know the diagnosis before I ever saw the patient. I knew their lab values before we ever drew their blood. And I was starting to practice medicine in a way that I wasn't trained for. And nobody understood it. Give an example, a lady came in, couldn't breathe. And I instantly had this idea that she's a 72-year-old retired attorney from Russia. She emigrated to the US with critical aortic stenosis with a valve area of 0.6. And she just wants to be allowed to die. Yet we're all geared up to intubate her and get her to the operating room and fix that valve.
Sure.
And I'm like, well, wait a minute. That's not what she wants. But she's never been to the hospital. She doesn't speak English. She can't talk. We've never met before. 2 minutes later, her primary care doctor comes running in. She's a retired Russian lawyer who speaks no English with a critical valve area of 0.6, and she's got aortic stenosis that she doesn't want surgery for, and she wants to be allowed to die. Everyone looks at me like, how did
where'd
you
you get
know
that?
And I'm like, well, wait, I don't know where I got that from. But I've all in my career, I was always told you're very intuitive. Like, you need to be hands-on clinician and not a surgeon because you can sort people with that ability. And that intuition has grown to where it's now pretty much the only voice I can follow. And that's led to the book. That's led to some development that I've come to Mike with and said, hey, Mike, you're already in this space and you already know how to do the mechanical side of this thing. Let's have a talk.
Yeah.
It's a calling on my life to find a way to connect with men and people who do our work to help them heal and to help them find, okay, so you can't lift cots and you can't kick in doors anymore. How are you gonna transition? And what's it like in that middle space? It's like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but I can tell you what, that light at the end of the tunnel isn't an illusion. The tunnel's the illusion.
Okay.
You're not in a tunnel.
Right. Right.
You're just in
What
a place where it's
what
going to
is the
come
name of
through.
your book again?
So it's called From Overthinking to Flow.
Okay.
And it really came out of my own struggles with just tremendous amounts of thinking about my problem and then not knowing what to do. And when you look at how the mind works, how about, thoughts and feelings and beliefs interact, when you look at where emotions come from and what they mean, and how do you step into peak states of awareness so that you can, do the right thing? It's like, yeah, first you've got to deal with the pain. When you sit still, the first thing that comes up is all that stuff that you haven't been able to look at because you've been too busy. And what's really cool about it is, as a doc that was doing PTSD, TBI, when I would give these nutrition programs through the IV to people, they would start to become more aware of their true self. They would start to realize they'd been making bad deals, and they started to renegotiate relationships. They started to become much more centered, but there was a lot of upheaval. So it's like, I would say, before you do 5 rounds or 10 rounds of NAD, just know that there's a good chance a year from now you're getting divorced,
Wow.
because your awareness of yourself and the deals you make is going to shift as your brain comes back online. And I've worked with guys who were, injured in the line of duty, blast injuries from combat. And every time it was like, if we don't deal with the mental and emotional stuff, they can't heal.
Sure.
You can do all kinds of stuff to the body. You can tell them what to eat and how much movement to do and how to get sleep. Every molecule you can name, I've given, whether it's psychedelics or peptides or NADs or nootropics. Like, I can run that catalog with you all day long, but that's all 1% stuff. The most effective thing is sleep and stillness, but the stillness is scary. What do you do when you're there?
Right.
But that's, it's like fear is fuel. And usually the thing you want is on the other side of that fear. So how do you get through that?
Yeah. So you came to me about a week and a half ago and said, "Hey, let's have this podcast. Let's talk about some of these issues." And you sent me a bunch of questions that I read through that I were like, "Dude, these are awesome." Why don't you go ahead and start asking those questions and we can talk through those?
All right. So the early life stuff, sort of like, we had we grew up in the same space, but we each had different experiences. And
100%.
I think you and I were both interesting in the sense that we never really navigated towards any kind of group. We always respected each other, but it was kind of like two lone wolves that are looking at each other across the field going, "You good?"
Yep.
And, we played football together. You could kind of see it as like a Bad News Bears kind of team.
That it was.
We were
I
a
mean,
bunch of clowns.
to our defense, though, we were fairly young in the football arena for Christian school. I mean, we
Yeah.
were playing Iron Man as freshmen. If you
Yeah.
remember back then, we had to play both ways because we weren't like the Ottawa Hills that had 70 people coming out. We had 13 people coming out.
Right. And I didn't know what it mean. I didn't know what it meant to take a hit, because when we were playing, football fumble, rumble fumble,
Right.
the hardest person that hit was Doug Derlew.
Yeah. Right. Right.
He just shattered your soul when he
Right.
hit you. But when we played Catholic Central and the Preston twins lined up as nose and tackle, and I was doubled down on as the right guard,
Yeah.
I have never felt that much sudden stop and just wrenching, shattering stillness
Right.
of
Right.
my momentum. And Mike was a fast guy. He was a roving quarterback, roving linebacker, and I didn't like taking hits from Mike either, because he was
Well,
going
I
through
think my
you.
junior year, I was named hardest hitting guy in the league. I got an
Yeah.
actual award for that.
Yep.
Um, It took a lot of practice, but my career was a little bit different. Well, career, my high school and junior high was different than yours, even though we went to the same school. You didn't get into football until ninth
Freshman,
grade, eighth grade,
correct?
right? I
Freshman year.
started when I was in kindergarten. And most people at our school didn't know that. They didn't had no idea, because I come from the inner city.
Yeah,
I didn't have the money to go to the Christian school. I had to get resources through our local churches in order to get me to go to that school. And the difficult thing for me in school was I was separated from my friends. I went to Sylvan um, Elementary, and all of my friends, because we're inner city, went to Oakdale. I grew up with those guys, but because my cousin lived right next door to me, my parents and his parents said they spend way too much time. Brian Durlew, I don't, you
yeah,
probably
yeah. I
know
know him.
Brian. We
Uh-huh.
spent a lot of time together because we were next door neighbors. We were cousins. Uh, my family says we're going to separate you two so you can go out and live your own lives, so you don't continue to have the same path. Looking back, I'm like, okay, I get it. I want these two kids to go their own way. But when I went to Sylvan versus Oakdale, I really felt separated from my community because most of those people,
Very
they
wealthy.
were in a different class of
Hmm.
people.
Yeah, and I was similar in the way that, my father had been a truck driver, and up until I was about 8 years old, he delivered bread.
Yeah.
And then when we moved we moved from New Jersey to Michigan, I started at Sylvan, but by third grade, he had changed to finishing his college and getting a master's and became a CPA. So we had to move to Chicago. So from third grade to fifth grade, I was the new kid in a place that I didn't recognize at all. And, very wealthy people, even though the area that we lived in was historically our family's neighborhood, my grandfather had gone into the ministry, whereas the rest of his brothers had stayed in waste management. So they were the rough guys under investigation by the EPA, duking it out with the Italians in Chicago. And funny story, my brother actually met a Gambino,
Okay.
and he went on a date with her. And when she said, "What's your last name?" He said, "Evenhouse." She goes, "Oh, we can't date because the Dutch mob and the Italian mob faced off in the 70s in Southside Chicago,
Right.
Cicero and those kind of places. And, let's just say that there's a few green trucks where dudes didn't come home from the dump. And,
It's ironic because I am half Dutch, half Italian. So,
yeah, and that's why it always confused me because this was a very insular kind of culture.
right.
Southeast Grand Rapids was a Dutch enclave, and that was very Calvinistic, very not so much legalistic as it was intellectual,
Sure.
and then it was all about work ethic. So you
Yep.
were you were only valuable if you could produce.
Yep. Yep.
And
And that's where I started to struggle early on in my life because I had a disability that no one could figure out. Going through school, I struggled tremendously. I struggled with friends because I was kind of an outsider. I was the inner city kid going to a more elite kind of school in that. And um, I actually was tested by the Sylvan Learning Center, the Calvin College, and stuff like that for dyslexia. I was tested for ADHD. I was tested for all kinds of stuff. And in fourth or fifth grade, I think it was, they basically came back and said, "Look, Mike, you have a higher level IQ than most people. I'm not a genius, but I have a higher level IQ, but you don't know how to read, and that's okay because you're good at physical activities, you're good at thinking through the problems." And they said, basically, take up a sport or take up a trade and you'll do fine in life. You don't need to read. And I was literally removed, me and actually two other kids, we were removed from reading courses back then. They're like,
yeah,
give these kids, physical activities to do, sports, whatever, and they'll be fine. And I didn't learn how to read until after I graduated high school. I had to
amazing.
teach myself a way to read the best I could by creating a list of hieroglyphics of basically words. I basically word memorized what I would hear. I
Mm.
still to this day don't know what the little backward upside down E's is, the little hash mark over things. When they say, look up the word if you don't know it, what does
Like
that
that
mean?
doesn't help me.
I have no idea. I'm like, that's the worst advice I've ever heard in my life because I'll go home and we had our spelling words, right? They always give you
Yeah.
the list of 10 spelling words. They don't tell you what it is. They just say, here are the 10 spelling words, look it up, and then learn the definition. So I would get the word, I'd go home. I don't know how to sound it out. I didn't know phonics back then. I'm like, all right, well, this word to me looks like trust. Trust means blah, 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 blah. Well, then I would go to school the next day, and then they would say, okay, what is the definition of truck? I'm like, truck. I've never heard truck. I don't know what that word is. So I would get marked off from that. And then they would write it on the board and they say truck. I'm like, no, that's trust. Well, that's this, and there was a total disconnect, and the
Yeah.
teachers didn't know any different back then. My parents didn't know any different back then. So I
Sure.
had to really come up with a way to get through school. So in order for me to do that, I relied on teachers. I relied on my coaches. I relied on girlfriends to help read books and stuff like that. And then even my senior year, I actually went down to the learning center and of the deaf and blind and got books on tape just so I can pass Miss Borderwhite's American Lit. I
Oh
took her
man.
2 or 3 times because she pissed me off
Yeah, yeah.
because she wouldn't
She couldn't
pass
have
me and
win.
listen to my coaches.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I was kind of the opposite where it's like my recourse to all of that confusion about the outer world was to just study and get more depth. And so school was a waste of my time.
Yeah,
It was like, you guys are playing at stuff that I don't care about. And it was, I wanted to lift weights. I was amazed at how the body could change with just those, simple stimulus. I broke my tailbone that first year of football, and that's what where the second year, kind of early in the season, and I just backed out, and it was like, okay, I'm not a football guy anymore. Put up with the ridicule, people writing quitter and loser on the dust in your truck and everything.
yeah,
And then, floating around socially, just moving between groups, finding that I really didn't fit. I didn't really understand them.
right.
And, being, having a high intellect is a burden as well as a blessing, because overthinking is the curse.
This is definitely something that is near and dear to my heart for the career that I've been able to put in. I've had some friends and that struggled with addiction. I've had some friends unfortunately take their own lives because of depression. So by having these around the fire table talks, I want to encourage anybody that's listening or viewing that if you're struggling with stuff, reach out to people because Matt's been there, I've been there, and there's thousands of people across America that have struggled with the same things that you're struggling with. You're not alone out there in the universe. We can go through it together. We can't fix what you're going through, but we can understand and we can go through it with you. Matt, before we end, do me a favor. Tell me the name of your book one more time. Where can people find it if they want to get a hold of it?
So it's on Amazon. It's a self-published thing. So it's called From Overthinking to Flow.
Okay.
And then last name is Evenhouse. It's got a picture of a wave and a little dude standing on the wave. It's a quick read, 120 pages. I broke it down to keep it away from big concepts of philosophy and psychology. It's just like, here's what a thought does, here's what a belief does. And then the second section is about building thought ladders. So when you find yourself in a hole, you can actually structure the next thought to feel slightly better. And you can change your state of being with that. So that's a cognitive behavioral structure that, is very popular. And then from there, I kind of moved into, these ideas of flow and how to get there. And it's really just about managing internal states and knowing yourself.
Awesome.
So
Well, once again, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time and talking with us and sharing, the insight that you had. We appreciate everything that you do. And I'm sure this is not going to be our last conversation. Once again, this was Heroes Next Door. Thank you all for watching for another Around the Fire Table. And we were talking to Dr. Matt Evenhouse in regards to the issues that affect you day to day. If you haven't done it yet, do us a favor, hit subscribe, hit notification, smash those like buttons, and make some comments below. We'd like to hear from you. If this is your first time listening to a podcast, whether it's on Matt's channel or on Heroes Next Door, we appreciate you. Be safe and take care of each other.